Garden Success is brought to you in part by the Arbor Gate, featuring unusual plants, artisan-created decorative pieces, and a constantly changing array of items that bring beauty, comfort, and even flavor to the home and garden. Arbor Gate, 15635 FM 2920, Tomball, Texas, 281-351-8851 or arborgate.com.
Garden Success is also brought to you by The Farm Patch, 3519 South College Avenue in Bryan, 979-822-7209.
Welcome to Garden Success with Skip Richter, the show designed to help you have a bountiful garden and a beautiful landscape. Call in now with your lawn and garden questions at 979-845-5689 or email your questions to gardensuccess@tamu.edu. And now, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension horticulturist Skip Richter.
Well, hello and welcome to Garden Success. We are looking forward, as always, today to visiting with you about things that are of interest to you in your garden and landscape. There's plenty to talk about today. I guess we're still in what's called winter here, but our temperatures typically are so mild that gardening continues all year. You know, we occasionally have a day where we hole up inside, but it's nice being this far south in the country. Of course, we might have a second opinion of that when summer arrives, but for now we're going to enjoy the fact that we've got weather through the winter, really, that allows us to be outside even on most days, enjoying the landscape and the garden. If you've got leaves that have fallen on your lawn, you want to go ahead and get those either mulched into the lawn with a good mulching mower or picked up and used as mulch around the landscape. Leaves are a valuable source of free mulch. It sits out at the curbside as your neighbors put theirs out there. And we hope that you're recycling yours. You know, about 75% of the nutrients that a tree takes up during the year are in its leaves. And that's always kind of catches people off guard, thinking, well, what about the twigs and the branches and the trunk and all that? Well, that does grow in size, but the tissues, the woody tissues in the interior of the woody parts of a tree, there's a lot of carbon there, of course, but the nutrient concentration isn't as high as it is out in the leaves. When I say nutrients, I'm talking about nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, sulfur, sodium, iron, zinc, all of those kinds of things that we're interested in providing for our plants. The interesting thing about it is that because those leaves are so valuable, they have multiple uses and really should be kept at your landscape. And I know a lot of people like to clean up and get rid of them, kind of like you sweep and throw out the trash, but not in the landscape. Think about how nature recycles its organic matter. In the forest, leaves fall to the floor of the forest. New leaves fall on them the following year, and now covered by more leaves, those old leaves begin to decompose. It's moist under there, and there's a lot of microbial activity. And it's sort of like from the top down to the soil, you see fresh or dry leaves on top, and then leaves that are starting to moisten and decompose into what we call leaf mold. Leaf mold, I guess the best way I describe it is, don't think of it like bread mold. We're not talking about that kind of mold. It's more of a British term, I guess. That's usually where I hear it used. But leaf mold is kind of a chocolatey brown leaf that is well on way to decomposing. You can still look at it and see, oh, that's a leaf. That was a leaf. You can see what it was, but it crumbles apart real easily. And then the final stage, the next stage would be actual compost itself, the decomposed material where you can't really discern what it was very well. And that's happening down on the soil surface. Earthworms are coming up and they're pulling organic matter down into their tunnels, especially leaves, and they're benefiting from that as well as benefiting our soil. And all the microbial activity, the release of nutrients, the mulching, the protection from rainfall so we don't get erosion and crusting, all of that is why we keep saying mulch, mulch, mulch. It moderates soil temperature in the hot summer and the cold winter. And it's just a valuable thing. And the amazing part about it is you get a lot of it free in your neighborhood. And so I encourage people to do that. Now, if you put out large leaves that haven't been broken up at all, they tend to blow around. And so what we usually say is, well, run over it with your lawnmower a time or two, break it up. If you're fortunate enough to have a leaf shredder or a grinder, you can fire up and really turn it into something unique and use that as mulch. But don't throw that away. Take advantage of it. It's free, natural, organic fertilizer and mulch material available. And when I say it's fertilizer, I don't mean it's the concentration of something that we would officially label as fertilizer, very low concentration, but it has nutrients like fertilizer does. And it over time, mulching and year after year, you're going to get a release of nutrients that's significant for your gardens and your lawns, your flower beds and things. I like to just remember that that's how nature does it, and that's a good way to go about it. And if you need something supplemented, we can always do that, right, by adding fertilizer. If you're putting in a new garden area, you want to get a soil test done, you can go online to soiltesting, one word, .tamu.edu. And the forms are available there, the submission forms. You want to choose the one that says urban soil test. And that doesn't mean you have to live in a giant city. It just means you're not looking at a farm or a pasture. You're looking at your yard, your flower beds and gardens, and you can, on that form, tell it, well, this is my rose bushes or this is my vegetable garden, as you're having them analyze it. And they give you the results. If you're here locally in the Bryan College Station area, you can drop it off at the lab or you can mail it to them. All that information is on the soil test form you download. Follow the instructions carefully, because the way you take a soil test determines how beneficial it's going to be to you when the results come in. The lab will tell you what is in the sample you send them, but the key is, does the sample you send them reflect what's in your lawn? So if you just scoop a little soil out of the top inch or two and put that in the lab, you are going to get a different result than if you dig a hole 6 inches deep and take some out of the bottom of the hole. And the ideal way is to have a even profile from the top of the soil down 6 inches deep, so you have an equal amount of soil inch by inch as you go down. Of course, we're doing it in a number of areas, not just one spot. That may be where the family pet paused last fall, and that would cause a inaccurate reading. Like I said, the soil lab will tell you what's in the sample, but that would not be representative of your whole yard. And so you want to take a mix of samples and send it in, and that's a composite that gives the best, most accurate overall picture that we need when we're going forward in fertilizing. Then you can mix in what you need. Maybe the pH has to go up or down. Maybe the nutrient content of one or another nutrients is too low and needs to be added. Do all that before you plant, if at all possible, for best results. Well, let's go to the phones. Our phone number, which I should have given out at the beginning of the show, is 979-845-5689. And you can also email me at gardensuccess@tamu.edu. We answer the Garden Success emails on the show. I don't answer those during the week, but when I come in for the show, we do. So if it's during the week, you can also email me at the AgriLife Extension office here in Brazos County. Let's go to the phones now and talk to Phyllis. Hello, Phyllis.
Hi.
Hi.
Skip. I have a very large area that is in ground cover, and the ground cover is a vine, and it has a yellow daisy on it. And this is the first time the freeze has gotten it. And I can see some green down at the bottom of these brown stuff. And should I scalp it, and when should I do it?
Well, I'm going to guess that what you have is Wedelia. That's the only thing that comes to mind as a yellow daisy ground cover. It's a very vigorous ground cover, by the way, too.
Yes.
So if it froze back, you want to cut it back and get all the dead out of there. That's a ground cover that, it's not having suckers come up everywhere, so it's not so much coming from underground as it is coming from above the ground. And so you wouldn't want to strip it down to the soil, but you cut back the dead, the top growth, and it's so fast growing that once the weather warms up, it's going to send out a lot of new growth that'll cover all that up that you've taken away, or that may be left not so attractive. But Wedelia is a easy and a fast grower. Like I said, the only challenge is getting it to understand there's such a thing as a line in the landscape where you do and don't want it to grow.
All right. Well, I was going to take a weed eater to it, but should I do so? I mean, it's so big that nobody can get shears and cut it.
Yeah. Phyllis, I've never tried cutting Wedelia back, but I know how it grows. And my concern with a weed eater is that's a lot of long, viney strands, and I just think they're going to get yanked and whipped around by the weed eater, and it may be a little challenging, but you can give it a try and see how it works. I don't know, I might even, that's a good question, I might even try maybe a mower set on really high and see how that does. That would also chop it up and let it fall to the ground to cover up the soil a little bit. Because after the pruning, there's going to be light coming through it, and when light comes through, then weeds are encouraged to grow. So that I don't know, other than that, how you would cut Wedelia back. Because you're right, if it's a large area, that's a lot of time on your hands and knees, and you may be saying things about me in my absence while you're out there doing that. If I told you to go do it by hand.
Right. I would just have to forget it. So it was beautiful. It was really beautiful. And so is it the first time that the cold has gotten it so badly?
Yeah.
And
yeah. I don't know. I think if it were my yard, I would probably look at it and see the extent of it. And if it isn't severe, the ugliness and the amount of dead growth that's left, if it's minor, I would just let it grow and cover it up. But otherwise, I would cut it back. And if you can get back close, maybe a few inches out of where it comes out of the ground, it's going to come back unless it killed the whole plant. And we just didn't have the kind of weather that should have killed that whole plant.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll experiment.
Yeah, it's interesting. How long have you had the Wedelia?
Oh, partially. I've had it over 20 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But I had some wax myrtle taken out, and so it covered the area that the wax myrtle was in. And so it's been like this complete ground cover in this area probably 2 years.
Okay. And did it survive last winter?
Yes, it did.
Well, I suspect that last winter the snow cover helped it a lot, because it went too cold for Wedelia last winter. I think it's an 8B plant, zone 8B, and so that's us. And so normally it's hardy and fine here, but dieback is not unusual, especially when we get a good cold snap.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you for the call.
You're welcome.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Our phone number is 845-5689, 845-5689, or by email, gardensuccess@tamu.edu. gardensuccess@tamu.edu. I was just talking about tree leaves, their value as a mulch, to make compost, to build soil. A couple more things I want to say is you want to get them off the lawn. To leave leaves sitting on the lawn all winter is essentially shading the lawn out. Now, St. Augustine doesn't go dormant like your a red oak tree would go dormant or something along those lines. What it does is it just slows growth and becomes almost inactive completely. But unless we've had a really good hard freeze that has burned off almost all the green stuff, there's usually some green down in there. And during the winter time, that deciduous tree that's been shading it all year, is the leaves are gone and some sunlight can come through. And because we do have mild weather in the winter, periods in the 70s even, it can gather a little bit of sun, maybe make a little bit of carbohydrates, and be better for it. And so to leave it smothered in leaves is not good and can cause an increased dieback on your lawn. So get the leaves off of there. The other thing that I want to mention is when you are mulching, and I had never realized that people did this, but I just talked to someone recently who would mulch, and then when they needed to mulch again, they would take all the old mulch out and put fresh mulch in. Well, the forest doesn't do that. In fact, the old mulch is your friend because it's decomposing and it's building that surface organic matter and a zone where roots are really happy to get up close to the surface because it stays moist and it's very rich and to thrive. That doesn't mean all the roots move up. You still have deeper roots, but to leave the old mulch and just add fresh mulch on top. That's what nature does, and that's what we should do. And you only need to add mulch when it gets a little bit thin, because then the light comes through, and we're wanting it primarily. We want mulch to deter weeds, but we also want it to look good. We also want it to protect from erosion and crusting of the soil and to moderate soil temperature. But you can just add fresh mulch to the top when that happens. Well, let's go back to the phones now and talk to Stacy. Hello, Stacy.
Hi, Skip. I have a few questions if you have a few minutes.
You bet.
So we're talking about mulch. Does it matter what kind of leaves of what trees? I know black walnuts usually supposedly not, but oak trees, can you just use oak trees leaves?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it gives me a chance to say some things about it that I think people need to be aware of. Number one, if you think about the forest or wherever any species of tree grows naturally, it mulches itself with its own leaves. And so even trees that have a very waxy, slow to decompose leaf, such as pine trees, live oak, magnolia, southern magnolia, those leaves eventually do decay and they fall apart. By the way, when you chop them up before putting them down as mulch, they decompose even faster. You're increasing that surface area where the microbes can get to them. But you can use any kind. Black walnut, I would need to look again, but I know that black walnuts produce juglone from their roots, which inhibits the growth of some plants, not all, but some plants are inhibited by the roots of that. I don't think the juglone levels in the leaves are that high, but I would check before I'd say for sure. But I wouldn't go seek black walnut leaves to put in a mulch, but it may be fine to use them, especially depending on the particular plant you want. I know tomatoes and grapes are very sensitive to the juglone, but not all plants are. But in general, any kind of leaves you want to use are just fine. And I actually think it's even better to kind of have a mix of leaves because you're bringing in, different. Some leaves are very rapidly going to decompose. Some are a little bit slower. And maybe each of those trees took up a little bit different levels of nutrients, not vastly different, but somewhat different.
Yeah, I mainly have post oak and a couple live oaks and then tallow and stuff like that. So nothing.
Yeah.
No, I don't have any black walnut, but I was just I've been collecting them and putting them in bags, and I'm I need to use this as a mulch.
Yeah.
And I was when am I going to use this in my garden versus buying the wood mulch?
Yeah, that's true. And Stacy, every year I gather a bunch of leaves. It's so nice for all the neighbors to put them out at the curbside for you. But I grind mine up a little bit, and then I can get maybe 2 bags of leaves into 1 bag, and put those as almost a stockpile, if you will. Somewhere where when it comes time for June, July, and August, I still need leaves, and they're not falling off the tree at that time. And so by grinding them up, you decrease the volume, and it makes you able to store. Some people put a big wire ring, a wire fencing and a ring with small openings, and they just fill that with their leaves, and that's their stockpile. If you're out in the country, that's okay. If you're it's probably the homeowners association in town wouldn't want you to do that in the front yard, right?
Yeah. Well, the main reason I called is I called a few months back, I think in the late summer, and I had a peach tree that was showing a lot of like the sap coming out of it, and I thought it was like borers or something. So I figured I would just cut it this winter and be done with it. Well, I was looking at my peach trees getting ready to prune, and I was like, well, only one of the scaffold branches looks like it's dead and died back. The other two have, not new as in budding out yet, but that, you get the nice waxy look on the things. I was like, well, it's still alive. Or I wasn't sure. I had bought a new tree to replace it, but I wasn't sure if I should just still plan on cutting it, or maybe it might be okay to keep it for another year or two.
It's impossible for me to tell you for sure, but I would give it a little bit of time and watch, and in the meantime, I would take a knife and scrape back behind the sap just a little bit to see, is it just a discolored, maybe dead bark area right around that spot, or is there a hole? And if there's a hole, then it's a borer. And the two biggest borers for your peaches here are the peach tree borer, which attacks primarily in the lower trunk area, and the lesser peach tree borer, which attacks the scaffold limbs up higher. Two different borers, and there's information online from A&M AgriLife that tells how to control them. Depending on which one you have, the approach would be a little different. But that would be a concern.
It started on the trunk and then kind of worked its way up this one scaffold branch. Like I just noticed like the little sap in like multiple spots on this one. I was like, well, I just kind of assumed that would be a borer.
Well, it could be that both are active. That would be a possibility. And the third
all
thing,
the other trees are fine. It's just that one tree.
Okay. The third thing are cankers, and you get diseases that affect the bark tissues. And whenever you wound the peach, it produces that sap, and it pushes the sap out. So it could be different things wounding it, from the insects I mentioned to a disease. And by scraping it back, you determine which it is. The cankers are not good, and they're usually a sign that that's a weakened tree for some reason or another. I would also just make sure that when you're taking care of the trees, you do most of your pruning in the winter. And when you do need to prune during the year, it wouldn't hurt to sterilize those pruners as you go from tree to tree. So that if it were something like a canker, you're not likely to spread it to the next tree.
Well, I was thinking of pruning this weekend since the weather was supposed to be nice.
Okay.
And we're in February, so I didn't know with that cold coming in maybe next week, the end of next week again.
This late in the season, there's no problem with pruning. If you want to wait until the next cold spell's done, that's fine. But we do want to get our pruning done before the tree starts pushing out buds. And depending on your variety of peach, that could be at different times as we go into spring.
I have different varieties, so it is different times. I've been meaning to do it, but every weekend's been bad weather.
Yeah. Well, go for it. In general, we don't say you need to sterilize pruners between cuts, but I know since we're talking about this, you said at one tree that has this problem, I'd save that tree to last to prune, just for that reason. And as far as sterilizing them, there's kind of probably the simplest thing is to just use Lysol spray or some other disinfectant spray like that. There are other options that have their drawbacks, but Lysol sprayed on it would kill the germs, if you will, and make it a nice clean cut.
Okay, and then I have one last question. I have a bunch that I started from seed, like broccoli transplants and cabbage. They're not totally tall, but they need to come out of their transplants. They're getting kind of that point.
Yes.
But now they're talking about, low mid-20s again next Thursday and Friday. Should I try to hold off another week, or should I just put them in the ground and try to put some straw over them?
I would. My first answer would be hold off. And you can bump them up to a larger. Are they in the little tiny 6-packs, or what size container?
A little smaller than a 6-pack. It's like a 40 cell.
Okay.
Actually.
A 40. Okay. So that's
it's
pretty
almost
good
a
size.
6-pack.
You could bump. I don't know how many you have, but if it's not too many, you could bump them up to a 4-inch pot and let them keep growing in that. Start to put their roots out in it. If you're going to plant them within a week, that's probably not necessary. But just remember when you pull them out, if they've been in there a little long, the roots are going to be really tight wadded up, and kind of put them in some water. Sometimes I'll just throw mine in a bucket of water and let them soak, and then kind of tease the roots apart a little bit before planting them. That's not essential, and a lot of gardeners listening are going, my goodness, I never do that. But that may help establishing with a plant that is way too root bound. So when you pull them out,
looking at the long-term forecast, it's like the 6th might be my next best option.
Okay. Now the second option, that one was hold on to them.
Right.
The next would be go ahead and plant them as soon as possible.
But it'll be like tomorrow or Saturday.
Okay, and be ready to cover them when it comes time for the freeze. If you there's a lot of ways to cover. Usually you want some kind of support to keep the cover off the plants, because if it's plastic, that's not good, touching the leaves. And if it's...
I have frost cloth. It's just trying to keep it down and not get blown away by the wind is the hardest part. So I have some straw or the leaves. I can just cover if the leaves don't get blown away. It's the problem.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, you could mulch heavily all around them, enough to where, almost the mulch is helping hold them up. But I usually stick something in the ground. I use PVC pipe, 1/2-inch PVC, and make a hoop out of it and just go down the row that way. But anything that holds them up a little bit would do just fine. And that's just an extra measure of caution. So if we were going to get a freeze that would damage them, underneath there, they're not going to have that problem. And if it's truly frost cloth and not just the insect protective covers that are
it's
thinner.
frost cloth.
Yeah.
It's Agrabon.
Okay. Well, if it's a heavier cloth like that, then that should be adequate. So if you've got access to that, I change my first answer and say go ahead and plant them.
Okay, I just got to figure out how to keep that frost cloth on the ground and not be blown off.
Yeah, sometimes
bricks and stuff.
Yeah, bricks, sticks, but I often will just bury the edge a little bit in the soil.
Okay.
And I think that's going to do probably as good. It's a little dirty, but that stuff washes off.
Well, and I figure the onions should be probably fine.
Probably fine. Yeah, I've been surprised.
They didn't like that first freeze got them pretty good. But
yeah.
Last one wasn't too bad.
Yeah, I had kale that the first freeze burned really bad, and it was an older plant. It kind of surprised me. I didn't expect that.
I lost all my cabbage transplants from that. So I restarted these back at the beginning of I had a few started, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm starting some more. I have some celery and stuff that's not ready to come out. That'll just go in the garage for a couple of days or something, or in the house.
Right. Well, and I don't know how many days, I haven't looked at the weather, but if you could wait until later in that day to throw the cover over them, it gives the sun time to warm the soil. So that'd be a time when you'd pull the mulch back, let them have whatever sunlight we have to warm up the soil a little more, and then when you cover it, you've got that heat sink underneath that's going to do the trick.
Yeah, it's probably supposed to rain.
Probably.
Yeah, so I'd have to do it like Tuesday and then rain on Wednesday and then Wednesday night. It's like one of those things where then it's just like.
All right.
I'm still leaning towards maybe just keeping them one more week. Or
Okay.
trying to get them a little bit.
Well, they're not a one size fits all, so anything you do like
not.
that would be fine. So.
Have you ever heard of anyone using wool for mulch, like off the sheep?
I never have.
Okay.
But we don't live in big sheep country, so it's not like there's a ton of that laying around.
I just have extra wool. I raise sheep, and I have extra wool from like 3 years ago that I need to do something with, but there's too much we call like hay in it to like pick all the little bits of hay out to get it processed. So I was why don't I just use it as a mulch, especially on the blackberries.
You could, but it would not decompose. It eventually, but very, very, very slowly.
But I'm thinking saying like under blackberry plants or something that you aren't going to move or anything like that.
You could do that. It would allow moisture through even when it matted up over time, which it would do. Mm-hmm. I don't see a problem with doing it, other than initially some may want to blow around a little bit on you, but maybe the fact that it's not going to decompose. And I always think of mulch as something that's helping improve my soil because I leave it there. But
I read one thing. It's like a 1-1-3 fertilizer or 1-3. It's like it actually does decompose after like 3 to 4 years.
It does, but it basically that's going to take soil fungi to do the breakdown. The other decomposers, bacteria and actinomycetes, they're probably not going to be able to handle hair. and being able to decompose. But that's just academic. Yeah, it's interesting. Take a picture and send it to me if you do. That I don't have a picture of wool mulch.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks, Skip.
Bye bye. All right, our phone number 845-5689, or by email gardensuccess@tamu.edu. Well, let's talk about what we do plant now. Now, what I'm going to say is, of course, the caveat is what Stacy just talked about, and a freeze coming up. So you wouldn't want to, just because it's a time to plant something, you may want to just hold off and give it one more week before you plant. That's not going to be a big deal. When you look at our vegetable planting date chart, by the way, which you can find at brazosmg.com. I'm going to check that. I always get confused, and I go to that site 1,000 times. But brazosmg.com has the Master Gardener's information, put a lot of information on there. And it's brazosmg.com. There's a section on gardening in the Brazos Valley, and then underneath that is information on edibles. And underneath that is our vegetable garden planting date chart. And that is a really helpful guide. It's colorful, and it's made for this area. So if you're listening from out of the area, when I was in Houston, we made one down there that's available on their website. If you're down Harris County level, I-10 level, and if you're further north, then you would need to adjust things accordingly. But this is one that I think that will be very helpful for you. And if you look at it, waiting a week to plant something is not going to be a really big deal. As we get to the end of January, we're still planting artichoke plants, or the dormant crowns. They dig them up and then reset them like you would a bare root fruit tree or a bare root rose. And the asparagus dormant crowns are planted in January and February. We're entering time for planting beets and Swiss chard. That's a little early. Those are not our most cold hardy vegetables, but we can begin to plant those. They have a little bit of cold hardiness, but not much. All the blue-leafed vegetables, we call them cruciferous crops. And fun tidbit of gardening trivia. Why do we call cold crops or broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, kohlrabi, Brussels sprouts, kale, collards, why do we call those cruciferous crops? Well, the reason is, if you look at their blooms, they have 4 petals that make a cross, cruciform. The blooms are cruciform, and that's why they're called cruciferous crops. They're very, very healthy, good for us to be eating, as are most vegetables. Very, very nutrient packed. And those are all planted ideally from the middle of January on, in most cases through February, but at least through the middle of February for the best planting dates. And that would be all the ones that I just mentioned. Some of the root crops, carrots and radishes and turnips, for example, we start to plant those as we get to the end of January and especially get into early February. And so those are all things that, it's time to go ahead and get those in if you haven't already. If you like the cool season peas, the true peas, that would be English peas, snow peas, sugar snap type peas. Now is the prime time to get those planted. If they come up and we get one of those really hard freezes, cover them up just to protect them, but they're pretty hardy plants. But the blooms and the pods are not as hardy. But we grow them now, and the reason is you need to choose varieties that reach harvest in about not over 62 days if possible. If they take too long, the problem is that they end up not harvesting before the weather heats up. And when the weather gets hot, those peas are very unhappy, and the quality of what you harvest is not as good. So we're kind of set between trying to wait long enough to plant them where they're not going to get frozen 5 times trying to grow, and on the other hand, not have them harvesting too late because it gets hot. And so we choose fast varieties and we plant them now. in order to get that done. Let's go to the phones, the number 845-5689, and we're going to talk to Ken. Hello, Ken.
Hello. I just have a quick question.
Okay.
About the timing of shearing back my salvia bushes that I have in the landscape. I'm concerned that if I do it too early, it might stimulate budding on those things, and then have freezing problems if we get a late frost.
Yeah, that's a good observation, Ken.
So how do you time that?
I see people doing that kind of thing all winter. But your point is well taken, that if you cut any plant back and then you have weather that's mild, according to that plant's thermometer opinions, it'll begin to regrow. That's the response to pruning. If it stays cold, it's not going to begin to regrow. But if we, after this freeze coming up, had 2 weeks where it got up in the upper 70s or even low 80s, which unfortunately is possible around here, you would get some new growth. And then if we had a hard freeze, you would get significant damage to them. So I usually wait until toward the end of winter to do mine. And so I would say early February is probably a good time. The chances of getting any significant growth and also having a very hard freeze start to go down as we get further into February. So I think that's probably good. I know some people that wait until spring, and they even are pushing out and they cut them back. And you said salvias. For folks listening that have different kinds of salvias, different ones kind of respond differently. Some of them are a little more of a succulent type of plant. Others, like Greg's sage or Salvia gregii, are woody subshrubs, and those we're just shearing them back a little bit, not doing such a heavy cutting on them. But salvias are, I think, the best genus of plants in our flower gardens.
Yeah, I really enjoy them, and so do the bees and the hummingbirds and lots of butterflies. So
yes,
they're great.
That's true. They're a good one. A very good one.
All right. Well, thanks so much for answering my question. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for the call. Going back to, our phone number, if you'd like to call, we still have some time for some calls, is 845-5689, 845-5689. Give us a call. It makes the show more interesting for us to be talking to you than me to be monologuing, which we can do, but I'd rather talk to you. So we mentioned some of the root crops that could be planted at this time. That's all good. And then our leafy greens. In addition to the cole crops or cruciferous greens like cabbage and I guess you call it a green in a sense, but kale and collards would be cruciferous greens. In addition to those, lettuce can still be planted, of course. Spinach loves the cold weather, can still be planted. And even mustard would be planted now, which technically is in that same cruciferous crop group. So those are all things that you could be planting this time. I don't know, maybe I left one or two out checking around on our official list here, but I think that pretty well covers it. If you're going to plant onions and you want them to form bulbs, and we're not talking about the multiplying onions, but the bulbing onions, that needs to happen pretty soon. You can buy those little bundles of transplants at the grocery store or at the feed store or at the garden center. I see them all different kinds of places, but wherever you shop for your gardening supplies, you usually are going to find onions this time of year. And you want to take those and plant them up with the bottom about an inch deep in the soil. Sometimes people look at them and say, how deep do I plant that thing? Well, if you put them an inch deep, the soil will help hold them up, and that's sufficient. And you want to water them in well when you plant them. And our goal on an onion is to get it growing as fast as we can, meaning as soon as we can and then as fast as it can grow. And the reason is that we want the biggest onion plant we can get very soon. And because when our day length starts to get longer, our nights become shorter, it signals the onion to quit growing just a scrawny plant and start to put a bulb on the bottom. And that bulbing initiation is completely, primarily controlled by day length. And so if you have a scrawny onion plant with 3 leaves, you're going to get a bulb with 3 rings. at the bottom, because each ring is the base of one of the leaves. And so the bigger your plant, the more leaves, the more robust it is, the bigger your onion bulbs can be. And of course, a scrawny onion tastes just like a big, fat, round, giant softball-size onion. But you want to get more production out of your onions. And so that's the primary way you do it. And so we're dropping them in the ground, and we're making sure and giving them small doses of nitrogen regularly over that period of time. Don't just count on what's already in the soil, but supplement them a little bit. Keep them moist but not soggy wet. Of course, they want full sunlight, which almost all our vegetables would prefer that. And that would be the secret to success, I guess, if there is such a thing, on your onions. Leeks can also be planted now, and both the onions and the leeks, by the way, are from transplants, not seed. If you wanted to seed leeks or onions, you need to do that in the fall. That's a whole nother thing. I prefer to just do it from transplants on the onions, and the leeks really could go either way. But again, do so soon because you need to get them growing. Keep a mulch around these to keep the weeds out. And again, that would just be reducing competition to get faster growth and better results. Those are all things to be doing in the garden. If you've already got some of these crops growing, you want to fertilize them a little bit, especially the leafy greens and all the cruciferous vegetables, the blue-leafed vegetables we talked about. If it's a rooting vegetable, it needs nutrition, and fertilizer can be helpful, but if you overdo it, you end up promoting top growth, and sometimes the root formation isn't as good. Another thing with the rooting vegetables is to make sure they're thinned to the proper distance. So if you think about a carrot, depending on what kind of carrot you buy, variety you've chosen, it's going to be, 1.25 inches in diameter, somewhere in that range, when it's full-sized. And so you wouldn't want your plants to be any closer than that, and even to be a tad bit further than that would be better. So that helps them to form a good root. I had some carrots last year where I went in to thin them, and some of them I thinned properly, and then I ran out of time, got busy, ran around being an extension agent, and it was much later when I came back and realized they hadn't all been thinned. The tops all looked vigorous, healthy, big, green, growing, but when I went to harvest, those that were thinned early had nice sized roots, and those that had been left crowded, the roots were still scrawny. And so excess nitrogen, lack of thinning, both result in a nothing to write home about root on your root crops. That's true of radishes. That's true of turnips and beets. They all need an adequate amount of space. And just think about, how big does a turnip get? How big does a beet get? That's how far they need to be apart at a minimum. And so encourage you to do that on those particular vegetables. Well, our phone number is 845-5689, 845-5689, or by email at gardensuccess@tamu.edu, gardensuccess@tamu.edu. Let's go to the email. I think we've done that today. Take some of the emails that have come in. Suzanne writes about wanting a large shrub or small tree to plant in the middle of a 20-foot wide circle that's a concrete, like a driveway around it. It's 20 feet wide, and she wants something that'll go in there that it's a full sun spot, and she would like it to give a little bit of shade and maybe to have some fall or spring color. So Suzanne, I think, thinking through the plants, I would have always said my first choice would have been a nice crepe myrtle that is selected as a variety to be one that gets about that size. But now with crepe myrtle bark scale being such a problem on them here in the region, I'm just not as enthusiastic about planting them. I won't tell somebody don't plant one, but that's just a troublesome problem that we don't have a really good solution to. Now, we have things that will kill it, but we don't have things that will kill it and not harm the bees that visit the flowers. And crepe myrtle is an important source of nectar for bees in the summer time when crepe myrtles are blooming. here in the Bryan-College Station area. I think my best choice would be a Chinese fringe tree. If you're in to the native plants, there is a native fringe that's native to East Texas, and then there's the Chinese fringe, which of course comes from Asia. The reason I like Chinese fringe better is because it is more floriferous when it blooms. The native fringe blooms and is beautiful, and there are a lot of good reasons to plant native plants, so I don't want to direct you away from those. But the blooms aren't as white and aren't as large and fluffy as on a Chinese fringe. Chinese fringe are very white. It's a spring blooming tree. If you get a nice tree with tons of blooms, when you walk out, you can almost smell, I think of it as kind of a honey-like smell that's in the air. It's faint. It's not, some plants have a gaudy, heavy fragrance, and this one doesn't, but it does have a fragrance. It's kind of nice. And it stays at about that size. In fact, 20 feet wide would be a pretty large Chinese fringe. But there's one in the Dig Garden up in North Bryan, the demonstration idea garden that the master gardeners have built and maintained. And you can go see it. It's in the middle of the garden in a circular area with path going around it. And in spring, go look at it. It's a very shaggy white bloom, real pretty. I think that may be one of the best plants to fit that bill. There's certainly a lot of others that you could put in an area like that. But I think if I were to pick you one, I believe I would go with that one. There's a little bit of a fall color to Chinese fringe, kind of a golden yellow fall color. I don't want to oversell it in terms of fall color. In fact, there's really nothing around here that has awesome fall color and that you would want to plant. Some of our great fall color Texas plants like Chinese tallow, the one that's the weed that goes everywhere, has awesome fall color. Don't want to plant that one. And the Bradford pear, the ornamental pears, they're very popular. They have beautiful blooms, but the long term on those is not good, and they don't last a long time. Last and look good for a long time. They have good fall color. And then the sweet gum, popular in East Texas, just isn't as happy here. But it does have good fall color. All those the sweet gum's way too big for that area anyway. I think as I end the show today, I'm gonna think of 3 more plants I should have told you, but that's what comes to mind for right now. Our phone number 845-5689, 845-5689, or by email, send me an email with photos of something to identify or to diagnose, if you will, at gardensuccess@tamu.edu. And if we don't get to your email today, we'll certainly tackle it next week. Another email I wanted to talk about is Carol has a Cuban Duranta, and it looks like it's dead. The Cuban Duranta is for those of you who know Durantas, they're a plant with large, kind of arching stems, and they have beautiful flowers that are typically kind of a bluish purple color. There's different varieties that have a different characteristics. The flowers are followed by little yellow berries in a cluster. Think of it sort of like a grape cluster, but the little English pea-sized berries that are also very attractive. But they're not fully hardy here. They will, in a normal cold winter, probably die to the ground in many winters. I won't say they'll never not die to the ground, but that they're not fully dependably hardy. They typically, in Zone 8B where we are, they'll come back from the roots. And so if it dies to the ground, it'll often resprout. But that is kind of dependent on the winter. And so we're kind of on that edge where I don't know whether to call it a perennial or not. And I would lean toward yes, it's a perennial. But the Cuban Duranta is one of the 3 or 4 varieties that have yellow leaves, not fully yellow, but yellow and green, striped, or some of them are yellow on the inside, green on the outside. Some cultivars are vice versa, yellow on the outside, green on the inside. Cuban Duranta has even more yellowing color, kind of everything from chartreusey greens to golden yellows in the flower. Very beautiful plant. So if it's not looking good, I suspect it's still alive at the base, and I would cut it off and I would wait and see. But you got to be patient. That's one of those plants like Pride of Barbados, or some people call it Redbird of Paradise, that is really slow to wake up. It'll be May before it even wants to talk to you about growing. And the Cuban Duranta, maybe not quite so much, but don't give up on it until we get to May, I would say. It probably is going to come back out for you. In future years, when we have those kinds of plants, we can mulch them heavily at the base, and that way, even if a freeze kills them to that point, we still have a lot of buds at the base that'll pop back out with vigorous growth because they still have that nice root system to power new growth coming back. So it's better to have that than to even plant a new plant, because there's a lot of established roots that'll get that old frozen back to the ground plant back in business really quick. So I wouldn't toss it. I would wait and see. And Carol, if you don't mind, I would be very interested in hearing how it does for you. You know, we in 30 plus years of doing this, I've seen a lot and heard from a lot of gardeners, but there's always surprises. There's always things that surprises me. And one of them was last year's freeze. If you would have told me that it was going to go to 7 degrees and Mexican heather, which is a warm season little low growing bushy plant, would live through it, I would just said no way. We can kill Mexican heather a lot warmer than 7 degrees. But with that snow cover, all of mine but one came back out. I mean, they looked dead, cut them off at the ground, and then here they come back when it warms up enough. So it's always learning in horticulture, and that's one of the things I like about it. That it's not like an engineering thing where there's mathematical rules and physics and things that apply, and you understand those and you can make it work. And I know we probably have physics folks that are listening going, wait, that's oversimplifying physics. Well, that's what I get for getting outside my field. But with life sciences, oh my gosh, we have rules, we have guidelines, we have science, we have research, but things combine, and there can be more than one cause for a particular problem, and more than one response to something that normally would be good advice that may turn out to be not so good advice due to factors that we weren't including in it. Getting a little philosophical there, but anyway, that's life science, which is why I love it. One of the reasons why I love it. Our phone number is 845-5689, 845-5689. Email gardensuccess@tamu.edu. I have time for another call, maybe two, if they come pretty quickly before we're out today. So if you got some questions, feel free to give us a call. I talk a lot about vegetables, and I often don't go into flowers as much. And we're going to be working on a chart like the vegetable chart that covers flowers as well. And I'm going to try to remember to include those more when I'm talking on this show. But we're in the cool season still. And so our most cold hardy of the cool season flowers, or let me say cool season color, because they're like the ornamental cabbage and ornamental kale, they have ornamental foliage. We don't grow them for their flowers, we grow them for their ornamental foliage. And they are very, very hardy. They're among the hardiest. Pansies, which are beautiful flowering plants, and violas, their cousin, the viola, are also beautiful flowering plants. You can plant all those now. If you're willing to take a little bit of burn back, or maybe to cover in a bad freeze yet to come, things like snapdragons and alyssum could also be planted now. There's a flower called stock that has a nice baby powder fragrance that most people aren't familiar with, but it's an old time, been around a long time for gardeners as a cool season plant. And there's a handful of other cool season flowers or foliage that we can grow. Of all those, I like violas best. I love alyssum also. When you're planting flower beds, you can use something like alyssum as a mound around the outside of the bed, kind of almost a confined ground cover, if you will, and then have the flowers that come up a little bit above that. Another good flower for cool season, and one of my favorite now, is dianthus. Breeders have really changed dianthus a lot. They used to be short plants, not so short, but squattier plants that were you got to choose between a red and white or pink and white. And now with the Amazon series and some others, we have some neon colors of purple and fuchsia and other shades, and they come in long stalks that aren't bad for cut flowers either, by the way. Think of a carnation. That dianthus and carnation are really close. And so I would include dianthus also now, because we still have several months where they can bloom and look good before it gets too hot. So those are all flowers to be planting now. If you're wanting to grow warm season vegetables or flowers, we can be planting those indoors now. In fact, we're well into the time for some of the things that take a little longer to produce. Some of our flowers may take 8 to 12 weeks to produce a good transplant. Others are going to be in the 6 to 8 week range. Certainly with our vegetables like tomatoes and peppers, that they're in the 6 to 8 week range. And with things that grow really quickly and don't like to be in a container long, that would be things like cucumbers and squash, for example. Those can be grown into something you can transplant out in 2 to 4 weeks. They do better if you don't leave them too long. Our last average frost date is around the end of February. So depending on how average this year is in terms of that, if you start planting in early to mid-March, that's a good time to get out some warm season things. We can plant a little bit later. But just like we said about the cool weather crops like the English peas and snow peas, I made the statement that we want them to grow and produce before it gets hot. Well, that's also true of some of our warm season, but hot is a lot hotter temperature for those. So if you have petunias, for example, or if you have the big slicer tomatoes and you plant them, when it starts to get hot, they just start wimping out. Maybe the tomatoes may live still, although they have a lot of pest and disease issues, but the fruit don't tend to set when it gets hot, and the petunias the same way. So we also want to choose pretty fast varieties and get them in as early as we can for their particular range in order to have the best success. Well, you've been listening to Garden Success. We are a call-in show every Thursday from 12 to 1 on KAMU FM. We want to thank those of you listening and also those of you from outside the area. You can also listen to the current show live or to past shows by going to the KAMU FM website and looking for the show Garden Success. So thank you for being a listener. Thank those of you who called today for being callers. And we look forward to a lot of fun in the garden as we finally get past this winter weather in about another month or so and get into some really wonderful spring weather. Take time right now out in the garden to do the things that help get ready for that by building your soil, doing your trimming back of plants that need trimming, and we'll see you again next Thursday.
You've been listening to Garden Success with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension horticulturist Skip Richter. Join us again next week as Skip discusses your questions about gardening and landscaping in the Brazos Valley.
Garden Success is brought to you in part by the Arbor Gate, featuring unusual plants, artisan-created decorative pieces, and a constantly changing array of items that bring beauty, comfort, and even flavor to the home and garden. Arbor Gate, 15635 FM 2920, Tomball, Texas, 281-351-8851 or arborgate.com.
Garden Success is also brought to you by the Farm Patch, 3519 South College Avenue in Bryan, 979-822-7209.